All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm very, very sorry to deprive you of Honorog's ramblings, but we have some magic to show you. And it is the other side of our semifinals bracket, a four-color Omnath mirror match, or maybe we should call it a pseudo mirror match because these players have very different deck lists. We're going to tell you all about the differences between those two deck lists as we get into the match. But for now, Noah, I'm gonna leave you with the exceedingly difficult job of parsing what's going on this board state. Can you talk us through?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like there's particular much going on. Matsu with a couple copies of Delighted Halfling, not going to matter too much in this exact mirror. As far as Stephen Urbani's list, he doesn't have very much counterspell interaction. It looks like Stephen does have a copy of Ren and Six in play on 4 with 4 counters on it, and he did just resolve a copy of the One Ring. So I'd say that is for sure the most important card in this matchup. And if Matt isn't able to, match him soon with his own copy, it's going to be really, really tough for him to possibly win this game.
So Matt's particular flavor of Omnath, he's really taken great pains to get One Ring advantage. And the way he's done this is he has 3 copies of the One Ring in his main deck and 4 copies of Karn the Great Creator. So Karn does the double task of improving Matt's access to the One Ring, giving him an effective 7 copies, and shutting down opposing copies of the One Ring with Karn's passive ability. Now, when we were talking off camera, Noah, it seemed like you were a big fan of Matt's particular take on Omnath. Can you tell us what you like about this?
Yeah, I think Matt just really hit the nail on the head as far as what is going to be most important when I'm playing these sort of mirror matches. We've seen Matt on camera multiple times this weekend, and every single time, Karn the Great Creator has been incredibly huge in these matchups. As you were saying, Reed, it basically gives him 7 copies of the One Ring. And, one card that I hadn't really seen up until now that Matt has decided to play as a copy of in his sideboard is this Sundering Titan. And as you'll notice, Reed, a lot of these lists nowadays are playing, multiple different triomes in their deck. So they wind up having every single, land type at some points, just so that they can afford to play these leyline bindings. So, Sundering Titan seems like a huge mirror breaker to me, as well as Karn the Great Creator. So having them both, despite this board state not looking incredibly good for Matt, he's facing down Steven's The One Ring, doesn't have a copy of The One Ring for himself. I think that his list is incredibly well positioned. And, over the course of a 3-game set, I would be really surprised if he didn't take it down.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big claim. I'm right there with you in terms of Matt having the structural advantage in the matchup. What about this game that we're watching right now? Like, do you think that one player is starting to pull ahead here on turn 44 of game number 1?
Yeah, I mean, that is always the tough part about these 4-color or 5-color Omnath mirror matches, right, Reed? You said it best yourself. I don't remember exactly what match it was, but I was watching you commentate a match, and you were saying, I'm kind of rooting for whoever has priority because they have all this mana at their disposal. So each of the turns, is going to there's going to be so many explosive things that are happening. So I think right now, Steven definitely has a bit of an advantage, right? He's got the One Ring going, and Matt doesn't. But, Matt has a lot of really, really good cards that he could draw from this stage of the game. And a lot of it starts with the Karn. So it's looking like he's drawn something that costs 4 mana, and all of his 4-cost cards are really important here.
Yeah, this could be how it starts. Pick up the Omnath. What's going on with the Boseiju Renin 6 stuff? What is Steven's goal with Boseiju?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like right now he's just kind of going after Matt's mana base. Just looking at Matt's list, it seems like we've got the basic forest, the basic plains, the basic island. Um, you know, yeah, he can search for some other lands, but it's going to be tough for him to always have a land to find for the Boseiju.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting into that territory where it's the game's gone long enough that it's almost like the players are playing with their whole library and not just the couple of lands that they've drawn in their opening hands. So whoa, cool play here. Matt is bouncing his own Leyline Binding, which will have the result of Legend ruling Steven's One Rings and giving Matt an additional use of Leyline Binding. Now, Steven, even though there's Teferi on the battlefield, does have the option available to Boseiju the Leyline Binding in response, which would then fizzle the Teferi's -3 and stop Matt from recasting Leyline Binding. So it seems a decent play. The One Ring still comes back, still Legend rules. Steven can choose whether to keep the tapped 2 burden counter ring or the untapped 0 burden counter ring.
Yeah, and I mean, as we see here, Matt not even able to find any lands off of this, channeling of Boseiju. So I think we're so deep into this game where all of the +1s on this Renin 6 are incredibly good, right? They bring back a Boseiju that's able to kill any enchantment, any artifact, or any non-basic land essentially for free.
Yep, very true. So this is Steven's plan finally starting to pay dividends, though it was a very, very long-term plan. For what it's worth, when you free up the One Ring from a Leyline Binding, you do not gain protection from everything. That only happens when you cast it from your hand. So Matt is able to attack. He's, in this case, killing off the Renin 6, losing Solitude to the Omnath. And now let's see what Steven can do on his turn, where he gets to untap and draw 3 new cards off of the One Ring. You know, it's funny, Noah. At first, I was right there with Steven of like, oh yeah, you keep the One Ring that has more burden counters on it. But actually, now that I think about it, if you had just taken the untapped One Ring, you could draw 1 and then draw 2, which is the same as drawing 0 and then drawing 3.
Except for you take less damage.
You take less damage, although if you're taking the very, very long-term approach, maybe you want to have the
will exponentially draw a little bit more. And he is at 31 life, so you have to put that in consideration as well, right? But also,
True.
Reed, when does decking become a concern? Like really seriously, when does decking become a concern?
Boy, that's a great question. My prediction is that the game won't actually end by decking, but there may come a point where the players have to start being a little more careful with drawing cards. We've already reached the point where players are out of fetchable lands. So yeah, it could be the case that Steven only has like 1 or 2 more good clean activations of the One Ring before he has to pump the brakes and think, all right, well, how do I make my entire library beat Matt's entire library? And boy, I mean, that when you frame it that way, you got to give advantage to the player who has Karn the Great Creator, right?
I mean, that has to be, what was part of Matt's consideration for building the deck the way that he did, I'm a little surprised here to see this game having gone on so long and not see Matt with any Karns in play, not see Matt with any copies of the One Ring in play. So not going to be like, oh, Matt got super unlucky this game, but it is looking a little bit like things weren't going how he planned it.
So this Boseiju plan on Steven's side, I guess it's a little bit of a race. You either want to get your opponent dead or you want to start working over their mana base before Karn comes off the top to kind of take to damage control, to take some of the wind out of the sails of what Matt is able to do with that powerful planeswalker.
Yeah, I mean, if Matt is able to find a Karn here, tutor up a copy of his own The One Ring, shut off Steven from using his, I'd say he'd be right back into this game. But if he doesn't find one soon, the lead that Steven has made just might be insurmountable.
It makes me really appreciate that play that Steven made where he Boseju'd the Leyline Binding in response to Fairy, with the key being it deprived Matt of a draw step. And with how powerful the cards are left in Matt's library, you just never know when that one draw step could be the difference in the game. So stopping the snowball before it starts, that's what it's all about.
Steven's counting. I don't think he's planning on looting very much at all with with either of these fables. It's just looking like he's getting so close to naturally decking. You know, I'm not even sure if he's going to activate this copy of the One Ring. When he did his count, it looked to me like he can't have more than like 13 or 14 cards in his deck.
All right, both players with Teferi Time Raveler, so there will be no instant speed shenanigans to be had. Steven, not concerned with his own life total. He's concerned with his library size. He's concerned with Matt's life total. He's concerned with Karn coming off the top and being really scary.
If you're Matt, I don't even think you care enough about this Teferi. It's okay to just let it go. There's not too many instant speed things in the matchup in general, anyways. You're really just hoping to pick up a copy of that Karn soon.
Looks like he drew Ren and 6. No help there.
So I'm a little curious as to why Matt has decided not to play the Ren and 6 in his hand. Maybe he thinks he's at enough life where taking a hit is fine, and also he doesn't necessarily have enough blockers to where he'd be able to stop the Ren and 6 from dying. But you know, has had so many lands in his graveyard. I'd be surprised if one of them, you know, wasn't a cycle land or a Boseiju or you know something that he could maybe use this game.
Yeah, it's a good point. It also makes me think, was Steven anticipating that and going after non-Triome lands with the Boseiju? If so, that's just, I mean, these players are so far ahead of what I would be thinking about just trying to parse the board state.
Yeah, I mean, it's truly overwhelming here just trying to follow along with how much stuff everyone has.
I have to say, this has got to be one of Matt's last chances, though, because once the reflection of Kiki Jiki's come online, it becomes really easy for Steven to close the game.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to always consider in these matchups though is how dominant the effect of the One Ring, you know, giving you protection is. If Matt is able to string together, you know, a copy of the One Ring into, you know, a Karn for another One Ring, he might just have enough time to actually mill Steven out.
Yeah, that's a great point.
But I mean, you know, you're totally right, Reed. He doesn't have forever. The window for opportunity for this Karn, for this One Ring is it's shrinking. Really big draw step here for Matt.
Let's have a count.
Like
Somewhere
it
in the
was
ballpark of 8
maybe.
cards.
Yeah, like you see what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, the game is not looking fantastic if you're Matt, but if you are able to string together a couple copies of the One Ring, it's not over.
Okay, Ren and 6 picks up Boseiju. That can hit a reflection of Kiki Jiki, which that's going to be the play.
Oh, so actually, he was only able to keep one reflection of Kiki because the other side is legendary.
I do not
So
think that's the case.
Or wait, or what? Did he Besage you both? Sorry.
Yeah, he must have just used 2 separate removal
Oh,
spells.
okay. That makes sense. That makes sense.
And Fable of the Mirror Breaker is a card that Steven has in his deck list that Matt has had to cut in order to access his Karns and his Preordains.
But I don't hate it. It might be worth it. I feel as though Karn and Fable are very comparable as far as the sort of advantage that they make you gain, in especially in these sort of matchups. So really interesting deck building decision there from Matt.
For those wondering about library counts, Steven has about 7 cards left in his library, which is enough to finish the game. It's not enough to continue drawing with the One Ring in the way that he would like to. Matt, I believe, is not really concerned with library size. I would not worry about that.
No, it seems a little bit more like Matt is more concerned with where his copies of the One Ring are.
Yeah, one thing I wonder about from Steven's perspective is if it does he have any ability to trigger that level 3 of Omnath for an additional 4 damage. To do so, you'd have to have 2 fetchable lands left in your library, which is a tall order when the game has gone this long.
Yeah, I mean that is a great point, Reed. It's going to be really interesting to see if Matt is able to claw his way out, through a couple turns of this game. Um, how it even plays out.
So here Matt is successfully able to bounce his own Leyline Binding, Legend Rules Steven's One Ring.
Yeah, I mean Matt basically saying access to an extra card from my deck, access to rebuying this removal spell is more important to me than you taking damage or not at the beginning of each of your turns. He's certainly sooner, if you're Matt, you're thinking Steven is sooner to deck out than he is to die to this One Ring. So I like that play from him.
Yeah, Matt could Leyline Binding the Omnath. We kind of know that Steven has the ability to free up the Omnath, whether it be with Teferi's -3, whether it be with Boseiju. But at this point, like the card draw from the Omnath enters the battlefield trigger, that is downside. That is shortening Steven's life.
Yeah, that's a great point, Reed. I'm a little bit surprised to see that Matt decided not to immediately replay that Leyline Binding. I know that it's not exceptional from his position, but the clock that he's under was not really great the previous turn. Getting rid of the Omnath seemed really important to me. I'm curious as to what made him decide not to cast it. So then
So we have 5 cards in library for Steven. Matt just trying to hang in there, make some key blocks, maybe get 3 points of life gain off of this Solitude getting in combat. Teferi has an interesting relationship to this Solitude in that you can bounce it, and because of the Teferi, Matt cannot recast the Solitude at instant speed. But then Steven really hopes to get the game over with before Matt gets another turn and another cast of the Solitude. But here, freeing up the Omnath and then bouncing Solitude, it's looking like he's inching closer and closer to lethal.
Yeah, what I think we're just going to see here: tick down Teferi to bounce Solitude, cast another Teferi, tick down to bounce this halfling, and then I think that is lethal.
Yep, and with just one card remaining in library to spare. Has he done it? Is there anything? Oh man, Steven Urbani winning the game with one card left in his library in game number 1. Now buckle up, folks, because we got 2 more games exactly like that one to bring you before this match is decided.
I mean, that has just got to be about as close as it could get. He had one card more that he could draw before drawing too many cards that game. If you're Steven, you see the look on his face. Both of them are just laughing. That was a wild game of Magic, super super duper close, and it looked like well played by both of them.
So funny, our semifinals, one side of the bracket was a Rakdos Evoke mirror match where they played 3 complete, close games in the span of like 20 minutes. And then the other side of the bracket, the players are going to decking, going through their entire library in game number 1. The Bradley, who's waiting in the finals, must be like, all right, let's get a move on. Come on.
Bradley right now eating a sandwich, taking a nap, doing some yoga. He's just really preparing for whatever's come next. He's like, they can do all the hard work over there in their 4-color Omnath mirror match. I'm going to relax.
Noah, have you ever had the experience in your career of playing one of these untimed top 8s, maybe involving like some best of 5 matches, and just being really fried by the end of the day?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as the top 8 is announced, even I feel like, yeah, I'm excited, but like I'm feeling tired. I've been playing for at least 2 days of Magic basically straight, and all I can think about is, oh, like I could use some rest, I could use some food, but I'm still hyped, I'm still there, I'm still ready to play, but totally just feeling exhausted. I'm thinking of one time in particular. I think it was. I don't remember what year it was, but it was states. I was playing some like unbarrel rights deck.
Sure.
That was like super duper grindy. Had like Forbidden Alchemy and playing this mirror match untimed in top 4, I think it was, and it lasted maybe 2 hours. And
Wow.
it's just it was grueling. Definitely, it has to be similar to how Steven and Matt felt after that game 1.
Yeah, so what I was just alluding to is like these players, whoever advances still has a finals to play. So if you kind of leave it all on the table, metaphorically speaking, physically, mentally, emotionally, if you go to the finals totally depleted, like that can actually be kind of meaningful. I know in other competitions, traditional sports, of course, the fatigue thing is very real. But even like chess, sometimes you think about these players playing hour-long games and long sets, and then going to the finals and really struggling to keep it together.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point, Reed, and I think that's definitely, if it's not on Steven and Matt's mind, it's got to be a little bit. You have to think about preserving your energy while still, giving it your best in the match at hand. So definitely something to think about after a really long series, especially in a mirror match like this where the games are so swingy, so close. Each one of your decisions matters so much.
If anybody is a real student of Magic and wants to check out the finals of the 2016 World Championships, 2015 or 2016, it was Marcio Carvalho against Brian Braun-Duin in a Bant Collected Company mirror match. And this was like the games just couldn't end because both players just flooded the board with creatures and nobody could really attack, and everything had 5 different activated abilities and enters the battlefield triggers, and it was just a total mess. And a best of 5 untimed set And by the time, I won't spoil the ending, but by the time you get towards the end of the set, it's like, how can these players even be still functioning based on how long and exhausting the games have been. It was really really interesting to watch because you don't tend to think of a Magic tournament being like a contest of endurance, but in that case, it was. You never know what demands a tough tournament is gonna make of you when all's said and done.
Yeah, I mean that's a good shout, Reed. That is a really good match for people to watch if they want to see really how Magic how deep Magic can go. You know, of these mirror matches where it's hard for one player to find a win condition. You know, you really have to rack your brain around these super complex board states where, well, we have a lot of the exact same cards, so we know how these cards interact well together, but once the board is so flooded, what can actually happen? What can I do? So, yeah, really, really interesting stuff going on there, and really interesting stuff going on here between Matt and Steven.
Yeah, so let's see if game number two is going to be a repeat, where we just go super, super deep, or if somebody can run away with things. It is possible. I've seen it before where somebody just goes delighted halfling unanswered, play all these snowbally cards and get a big advantage really quickly. But I think that's probably the exception rather than the rule. And personally, I'm ready for a long one.
Yeah, there is always the ability for one player to run over with the game, as you said. Delighted halfling, it makes for some pretty solid curves.
Wow, I saw a cool one in Steven's hand, Obsidian Charmaw. So you're
Yeah,
not getting the mana rebate on that one, but just a pretty powerful card in a matchup where people value their land so much.
yeah, I'm impressed to see Steven packing the full 4 copies of Obsidian Charma, while Matt only has 3. Matt does also have this Sunring Titan, so maybe he was considering, I have some other cards to interact with lands, and I also have just this huge, Karn board already. It's hard for me to include too many cards. But I think Steven's list is the first list that I've seen so far this weekend with the full 4 copies of Obsidian Charma, and I think that's going to be really impactful for him in this matchup.
If you want perspective on how much these players value Obsidian Charmaw as a sideboard card, Matt Zhu has 12 one of Karn targets for his wish board, and then the only non-artifact card is 3 copies of Obsidian Charmaw. That's his sideboard. 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 3.
Yep. Seems like quite the card for a matchup like this.
Both players developing well with Ren and 6. This is going to ensure that they can make all of their land drops even deep into the game.
A lot going on so far this game, just some really typical stuff. But now we're coming onto these turns, Reed, that are really important for both of these players. Once you hit 4 mana, it just unlocks so many cards in your deck. You've got these 4 copies of Omnath. You've for Matt, you have these 4 copies of Karn. For Steven, you have these 4 copies of the Ring. It is just these couple of turns are going to be the most important ones for both of them.
What's the best way to get ahead in these mid-game turns? Let's say turns 4 through 6.
I mean, for Matt, it's got to be Karn, right? Because it shuts off the One Ring, which I feel is one of the most powerful cards. So, and especially when you're playing a Karn, you can just minus it, get a copy of the One Ring, and then even if Steven is able to, use one of these leyline bindings, use one of these lightning bolts to finish off your Karn, you got value out of it already.
All right, let me pause for a second. We'll do a little exercise in terms of evaluating our top 8 and what happened and what didn't happen. So how many copies of Preordain, the newly unbanned card, appeared in our top 8? It's 4. It's just Matt's particular brand of 4-color Omnath has chosen to play Preordain. It's an optional card. There's a lot of customizability in these decks. You can choose to play it or not play it. Steven does not play Preordain. But that's our newly unbanned card. What about the Lord of the Rings newly printed card? The One Ring, we talked about that being a central card in this matchup. 4 copies each, but kind of 7 copies in Matt's deck because he's playing Karn in part to improve his access to the One Ring. We also saw 4 copies in Ian Friedman's mono black midrange deck, so pretty good weekend for the One Ring. How about Orcish Bowmasters? I think we had everyone with black mana had 4 copies. That means 2 Rakdos Evoke players and the mono black midrange deck. Delighted Halfling appears 4 copies each in both of these 4-color decks. Living End had some cycling land cyclers from the new set. So yeah, I mean we've seen Modern change a lot in the wake of the new set and unbanning, the results of the Pro Tour, and we're still seeing innovations, and Matt's deck is a great example of that, the very new, fresh take on 4-color Omnath.
It's Charma time, and Matt is not loving it. The one really big threat that Matt had for this game was the Karn, and it got Dovin's vetoed. So and also this Ren and 6 just got cleanly answered. So he really hasn't been able to get any sort of anything going for most of this game. It's looking like he could possibly have a Solitude here, which would be excellent.
Yeah, props to Steven for orchestrating that little sequence, making his cards line up properly against the opposing cards, passes with Dovin's veto on the right turn, tags the Karn, cleanly resolves the Obsidian Charmaw. But Matt, not out of it, does have, as you said, the right answer with Solitude to kill the Charmaw and keep that Ren and 6 off of Emblem.
Interesting turn there for Matt just passing back again. I see a Teferi in his hand, maybe some other options that he could be, thinking about doing for these couple of turns. I wonder why he'd just pass again here. Maybe he has another copy of Solitude, maybe some other sort of instant speed interaction like Leyline Binding. Just quickly looking at the lists, as you mentioned, Reed, Matt's list is just the 12 one-ofs in his sideboard for his Karn board, and then the 3 Obsidian Charmaws. So he doesn't actually have access to any sort of card like Dovin's Veto that Steven has. So it kind of could only mean a very limited amount of things when he just passes with 5 mana up and the ability to be casting some spells in his hand.
Yeah, so what's your read on that? Do you think it's just has to be Solitude, or is there any way that he has an awkward hand and can't play anything?
Yeah, I mean, I saw the Teferi, so I know for a fact he could cast anything, or something. But I'm a little bit surprised to just see him opt to do nothing if it wasn't exactly Solitude. I kind of don't mind leaving up 5 mana for a Solitude, knowing that that's going to be your play. You can kind of think, hey, if Steven here has an Omnath, I have the Solitude to respond. If he has a Charmaw, I also have the Solitude to respond. But it's just incredibly surprising for me to see, Matt leave up the 5 mana, not deploy the Teferi on a previous turn, and also, not have anything to do.
What about this? Solitude attacks Planeswalker. 4/4 Obsidian Charmaw does not block.
Yeah, I just am not sure exactly what I'm seeing here. Really peculiar play.
I always find those moments interesting because it's like somebody who learned Magic 1 hour ago, they'd be like, yeah, like 3/4/4 beats 3/2. What are we what's confusing about this? But then when you get to such high levels, like what these players are playing at now, there's just all these millions of considerations of, what is this player representing? What could they have? What's the value of my Obsidian Charmaw? And the game just kind of comes full circle in that way. Magic can be the simplest game ever or the most complex game ever.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what it was more than anything was the immediate brave attack here from Matt, right? I think it had Steven thinking like, man, Matt is just so fearless with this solitude. I'm not so sure I can block. So yeah, I think really heads up attack here from Matt, kind of representing a possible Ren and 6 to finish off the Charma. Maybe, you know, saying, hey, I don't really care about my solitude. Maybe I have some other sort of interaction. But I was a little bit surprised to see the speed at which Matt decided to do it, but that just shows his confidence and shows why he's here in the top four.
Yeah, you think Matt sold it well? Is that what it was?
I think part of it, right? Like, I mean, how immediately did he just attack his 3/2 into his 4/4? Pretty quickly. You don't. That's not something that you do by accident. Like, oh, I didn't realize your Charmaw was a 4/4. Like, yeah, you have a lot of copies in your deck.
Yeah, well, regardless, it's interesting Magic. I'm having fun watching this.
A little bit surprised to see him just stop here, though. If you attack once, you're certainly attacking twice. Steven said, "I'm sick of it. I just can't watch you keep attacking me with this solitude. I'm blocking. I've had
Line
enough."
in the sand.
This
Okay,
makes
so
sense.
here's what it is. It's Leyline Binding frees up my Ren and 6. Ren and 6 finishes off the Charmaw. So it was not a pure bluff. It was at most a semi bluff.
I mean, it seemed like Matt was just willing to make that play with the leyline binding, regardless. Uh, so just a heads up attack in general from the solitude. Uh, I'm
Yeah, here's the thing: is the Solitude is not doing anything for you if you're not putting it in combat, right? So it's like you might not want to lose your Solitude, but you're kind of losing your Solitude already if you're unwilling to put it into combat. So there's sort of that dynamic at work as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Reed. Because if you're not attacking with the solitude, you're almost certainly not blocking with it. And here, just looking like a really mopey play from Steven of, yeah, kill your Ren and 6, but spend, the entirety of one of my Ren and 6s. The second one I have to tick down to 2, not really setting up anything, especially when you have access to so much mana in these sort of matchups. You would expect something a little bit more impressive, maybe a copy of the One Ring, maybe some Planeswalkers. So
Speaking of the One Ring,
yeah, and I mean, Matt plays 7 copies of the One Ring for a reason. It is basically the best possible thing you could be doing in these sort of matchups, and Matt's realized that. And it really has seemed to me so far like these matchups have come down to this ring advantage. Last game, we saw Steven take over the game with only 1 card left in his deck due to the amount of value that the One Ring turned out for him. And I think we'll see something very similar here happen in the opposite way if Steven isn't able to come up with an answer for Matt's ring pretty quickly.
Okay, we've seen this before. The adding a burden counter and then drawing cards equal to number of burden counters, that's all part of the resolution of the ability. So when Matt bindings the One Ring in response to the activation, no burden counter ever sees the light of day, and Steven winds up drawing, well, 0 cards when the ability resolves.
Yeah, I mean, Leyline Binding really showing why it is, the removal spell of choice for these 4-color Omnath decks. Answers every single non-land permanent really cleanly. Most of the time for only 1 mana, just based on the way that they've built their decks. So super, super powerful card.
I think Steven is stuck. His hand does not have anything more that he can play out. The Charmaws have been just okay, it seems. I can see a world where you could cut your opponent on a color, or you could get a little bit ahead and then preserve your advantage by continuously blowing up their lands. But in a world where Ren and 6 is going uncontested and Matt has ample time to just pick up those lands and play them again, and the Charmaw is not one of these snowbally cards where it draws you more cards, where it gets you access to the One Ring, where it does all these crazy things like Omnath does. Maybe it's not one of the best cards in the matchup. I'm not sure.
I think you bring up a really great point, and I'm a little bit surprised to see, how these Charmaws have been so lackluster in this sort of matchup. I guess it's probably also a card that Matt and Steven decided to include in their deck for these Tron decks, for these Amulet Titan decks. But I expected it to be putting in more work in this match than it has been so far.
Yeah, for sure. That's for perspective. Like, it is not here for this matchup. It's more just that Steven decided it was a marginal option that he wanted to have in his deck for this game, which is fine. I have no gripe with that decision, but just kind of looking at the texture of the game where Steven has drawn multiple copies and it looked like he might be running away with things, but now, kind of just like always, when the dust settles, it's the One Ring that is determining the outcome of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough to see, one player really just seemingly running away with the game single-handedly on the back of the One Ring, uh, just because it provides so many cards every single turn. So the One Ring advantage, seemingly incredibly real, uh, which as I was saying earlier, certainly a bold claim for me to make, but Matt Zoo's list looks perfectly set up for what you're expecting in these sort of One Ring mirror matches. It coming down to being incredibly important to see who can answer the One Ring and who has more copies. Karn does both.
Yeah, so Matt is all it's almost like you're playing Tron. This was the reason that Tron was a successful deck at the Pro Tour, is that Tron was the deck going over the top of everyone else, playing these mid-range games, doing the One Ring thing. And now, in a world where Tron has a little bit of a bullseye on its back, people sideboarding 3 and 4 copies of Obsidian Charmaw, Matt has found a different way to achieve the same thing. He says, I'm going to play the best One Ring deck, but I'm going to do it in a way that's well rounded, that's not excessively vulnerable to any goofy sideboard cards. And it's paid off for him. He's now probably going to be 1 game away from making the finals here at MXP Oakland. To MXP Tacoma. I correct myself. Excuse me.
Oakland's coming soon. We're not quite there yet, but yeah, I mean, really seeing the power of the One Ring once again this game. Just unanswered One Ring just simply gains too much value for whoever has it. Yeah, not too much to even say about this. Steven kind of sitting here, hoping that he could play some of his more impactful cards. Hoping that he has a copy of the One Ring or two. So far, hasn't been able to find it. He's had a plethora of these Charmods, but I think he's had enough.
He has indeed had enough. So that's Matt equalizing the score. They're going to go to game 3 because why not? We need more magic out of these two players.
Well, how long could this game go?
Famous last words. So, talking about the sideboarding, we saw, I believe, no changes on Matt's side, because his sideboard is mostly devoted to the Karn Wish board. On Steven's side, I was kind of lukewarm on the Obsidian Charmaws. I could take him or leave him. I was impressed by the 2 copies of Dovin's Veto. Steven was able to make good use of both of those, so I would expect them to certainly stay in the deck for game 3.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely like to see the Dovin's Vetoes, right? In the same token, there is these 4 copies of Delighted Halfling, and then every single card that you could realistically Dovin's Veto that's not Leyline's Binding does kind of get protected by these Halflings. So it's a little bit, here and there, but I think it's an important one, as you said, for him to have, being able to have an answer to the One Ring if your opponent doesn't have a Halfling, or, even just 1-for-1 answering Leyline Binding does seem decent. I don't really know that Matt needs to cyber anything. As you're saying, he's got this huge Wisp board. The Charmaws were relatively unimpressive, especially on the draw. I'd be surprised to see him have them in. But I think that is really where, his list shines. It has these 4 Karns. He doesn't need to cyber anything. Yeah, just really strong for these mirror matches. He built his deck for this matchup. On Steven's side, it seemed as though he valued Charmaw more than something. Maybe he decided the one of Nissa wasn't necessary for this matchup. Maybe, I don't know, the extra Furies. I'm a little bit surprised, as you were saying, Reed, to see these Charmaws. They were looking a little bit lackluster in the games. And it does look like, Steven's list has a lot of cards that are impactful in general in the matchup. So I'm interested to see what he decided to take out of his deck.
Yeah, it's certainly not obvious how you want to sideboard. You make a good point that if you want to be doing the Dovin's Veto thing, you need to have plenty of answers and kind of commit yourself to killing Delighted Halfling on site.
Yeah, I
Wow,
mean, one
huge mana advantage for Steven. This is pretty big, having 5 mana while your opponent has access to only 1.
Yeah, that's huge. These Delighted Halflings in combination with the Charmaw is going to be ginormous. One thing of note, though, I don't think Steven had a land drop for the turn, so he was really banking on this card draw from that One Ring.
All right, so Steven needs to make another big play here. Teferi looks pretty good. That Leyline Binding is going to be a problem once Matt gets another turn, but the combination of bouncing it and preventing Matt from recasting it instant speed does free up Steven's One Ring, gives him 2 more draw steps, so hopefully, for his sake, he found a land. He did.
Yeah, very necessary land drop there for Steven. Matt, with the Ren and 6, so he's already locked up at least 4 lands, very likely more than that. A little bit of an interesting decision that he has here, with the Ren and 6. Yeah, it's very being in play on 1. Doesn't matter very much, but it could tick up. If you don't decide to -1, you you're giving Steven basically a right of way with the Teferi. But, you know, in the same token, you ticking down with your Ren and 6 does leave it susceptible to just being attacked with these two delighted halflings.
Yeah, you said it. So that turn was basically what we could have expected. The Ren on the board kills the Teferi. The Leyline Binding that was bounced comes back down and answers the One Ring. So now the question is, do these halflings succeed in killing Ren and 6? They do not.
This lightning bolt is actually so huge here, and I don't even know if Matt realizes how huge it is, just because it stops, you know, these halflings from adding mana, but Steven with the perfect follow-up.
Yeah, I think if I can see correctly, none of Steven's lands produce blue mana. So if the second halfling dies, there could be a world where he's stranded with all those Teferis and Omnaths and stuff like that, unable to cast them for some amount of time.
That's not ideal. It's looking like this might be a solitude as well here from Matt. So oh, in fact, it was a solitude first from Steven.
Okay, so Steven solitudes the Omnath to prevent Matt from getting mana and double spelling. So pretty decent spot for him. You know, in theory, he gets to attack the Ren, he gets to replay the One Ring, but man, this is so crucial. Matt answering that One Ring, Steven had to pitch his own Leyline Binding to do the Solitude. So I think Matt has really fought himself to a winning position in terms of board presence and card advantage.
I mean, seeing just how important it is to have this leyline binding as an answer to the One Ring. Every, you know, as we were saying before, these games have often been decided by who has an unanswered One Ring, and it's not looking like, you know, Steven has even had that opportunity much this game. You know, he's drawn a total of one card off of the 2 One Rings that he played.
Steven has access to the full 4 Bosejus, 2 main, 2 sideboard. I wonder how many he has in his post-board configuration. Thinking about these leyline bindings, you know, if destroying leyline binding with Boseju is a really important pattern.
My guess would be at least, you know, the two. They're certainly keeping the 2 in from the main deck, right? Like Steven is not going to be taking either of those out. My guess would be it shouldn't be too hard to fit in a third one. The real question is, you know, I was already curious as to what cards exactly he'd be taking out. You know, Prismatic Ending, not seemingly super impressive, but it does answer Ren and 6. It does answer Teferi. You know, you could use it for 3 or 4 mana in a pinch to answer a copy of the One Ring. So it's seeming a little bit hard for Steven to even take out too many of the cards in this deck. You know, do we start looking at Fable of the Mirror Breaker as a card that we take out in a matchup that we're expecting to go late? Like, I don't really think so. So I'd say it's less about how good Bosejo is necessarily in this matchup, and more about how does Steven, you know, feel that he values them. You know, is it better than any card, particularly in his main deck? I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a great question. Meanwhile, in this game here, we have the Karn, which is quite the threatening card. It got Pithing Needle on Ren and 6 right away, and then, of course, if Matt's able to untap with it, it gets even worse. Steven, I think, is taking the gambit that he needs to draw a fetch land off of his Omnath, and he did it.
Yeah, I mean, basically as ideal as it could get from right here for Steven. You know, as far as that turn goes, this Karn was in play, so he could not even draw something like a copy of the One Ring to sort of try and gain advantage. Wow. Okay, Matt showing so much respect here. Okay, this is how much I think Matt feels he's favored in the matchup. He just pitched the third copy of Leyline Binding to Solitude away this this Omnath when Steven only has one card in his hand. So Matt's basically saying, look, I still have a Karn in play. I've already gotten rid of two of your copies of the One Ring, but like I still have more in my deck. I can use this Karn to go and find something good in my sideboard. You know, I have access to Sundering Titan, probably one of the most valuable cards in a matchup like this, and I'm only 2 more lands away from casting it.
Steven pings Karn, which means that if Matt chooses to -2, that will be the end of the Karn. Matt says, that's a fair trade. Yes, please. Is there any way you just get the Sundering Titan to cast a couple turns from now?
Certainly, you know, a thought to doing something like that. I don't hate just getting a Sundering Titan in a spot like this, but I'm looking at the One Ring if I'm Matt. You know, there's a reason why he's chosen to play these Karns, and it is so that he has access to basically these 7 rings. So might as well start there. You know, just really kind of gain some advantage with your ring, and then you know it's looking like Matt has another copy of Karn, which he can then you know look at in future turns to possibly pick up the Sundering Titan.
Here's Charma, but this is similar to game 2. It's just not going to be enough against a player who already has the One Ring, who has access to cards like Delighted Halfling and Wrenn and 6 to keep pace in terms of mana.
I mean, awkward, right? Like Charma, while not being a bad option, you know, it being a 5-mana card that is just a 4/4, when so many of these cards that we're seeing in this mirror match are just really dynamite, you know, 4-drops like the Karns, you know, the One Rings, the Omnaths. The Charma has impressed me way less than all of those cards.
Agreed. We're watching Matt slowly and steadily pull ahead, in part because of the One Ring. And this is not just Matt drew the One Ring and Steven didn't. Steven actually drew multiple copies, but Matt was just able to make everything line up the way he needed to. So Matt's Leyline Binding answers Steven's One Ring. Matt's Leyline Binding answers Steven's One Ring. Steven's Leyline Binding gets pitched to Solitude to deal with Matt's Omnath. Now Matt finds Karn, gets the One Ring, that goes unanswered. That's the determining card, you know, pulling him ahead in this game.
Definitely, you know, this matchup being so focused on the One Ring. Oh, this is a Solitude. That's just horrible for Matt, basically deciding that he can't even play around Solitude. But you know, anyways, as I was saying about the One Ring, it's like this is exactly why I'm going to keep saying it. You know, that Matt built his deck the way that he did. You know, he is valuing the One Ring so highly, and it shows. Any matchup where we've seen a One Ring go unanswered, the player is just so favored to win. And you know, this build with the 4 copies of Karn, the Great Creator, you know, I think my prediction might be coming true.
Should we start looking ahead to a possible finals? How do you think the Karns would perform against Rakdos Scam? And if you're Bradley waiting in the finals, do you have a preference of which of these 2 opponents you would face?
I mean, I feel like that is one of the matchups where the Karn is a little bit less impressive. You know, the Rakdos Evoke deck is much more focused on, you know, your Omnaths and your One Rings, you know, just like simply the card being cast. So having the access to this Karn board, not going to be as impressive for, you know, for the 4-color Omnath deck. So I think if you're Bradley, you would rather play against Matt, probably. I mean, it's not that Steven's list is particularly more impressive against you. You know, he has what, this copy of Nissa and these 2 Fable of the Mirror Breakers, and then a few Furies. I guess Fury is the big one. You'd probably not want to play against Steven's Furies if you're playing this Practice Evoke deck. It's a little bit less that you have to worry about playing against Karn than you would have to playing against a card like Fury. So
Interestingly, neither player has access to Veil of Summer. That's a little bit surprising to me.
yeah, you know, I can understand it a little bit in Matt's case. You know, as you were saying, has this 12-card Karn board, a little bit hard for him to fit any card in specific. But yes, you're right. It's a bit surprising to see Steven not include any copies of Veil of Summer due to the popularity of this Rakdos Evoke deck. And here we're really just seeing Karn take over the game. I mean, yeah, of course, Matt has been sitting with so many turns with this One Ring in play. He could basically win with anything. But I really think that the Sundering Titan tech is really impressive to deal with these mirror matches. Every single time that I've seen, you know, Matt cast it, it's been at least a 4 for 1, most of the time a 5 for 0. So
Steven does not have the body language of somebody who's confident in this game. Just binning half his lands, Sundering Titan, giving the thumbs up. I think Steven did a great job. I really liked you know, the way he played this match. But it looks like his run is going to come to an end in the semifinals here.
yeah, I mean, just a really tough game to come back from if you're Steven. The One Ring, not really a card that you can beat after it's been in play for a number of turns unless you have a substantial amount of pressure. And as we can see, Steven not really able to get anything too impressive going starting off this early game. You know, he started off with 2 delighted halflings, you know, so if he could have managed a turn 3 Omnath, you know, followed up with a fetch land into a Charmar or something like that, you know, there were some impressive draws that he could have had, but it just didn't really seem like things were necessarily going his way.
Steven's still fighting the good fight.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Reed, you know better than most. It's not over till it's over.
This one I think is over.
All right,
Yeah,
this
I
one
mean,
might be over.
I agree, and we have definitely seen some unlikely comebacks over the course of this broadcast, but this is just not one of them. There's no single card that Steven can draw that gets him out of this. He knows it, and this is Matt Shu advancing to the finals to face Bradley and his Rakdos scam deck. So a classic battle. We've worked our way through 13 rounds of Swiss, a quarterfinals, a semifinals, and the last 2 decks standing are, you know, for some people, these are the 2 defining decks of modern: Rakdos Scam versus 4-color Omnath. What's your prediction?
I mean, looking at Matt's list, it does seem like he was a little bit more prepared for something like the mirror match than necessarily the Rakdos Evoke deck. What I do really like about Bradley's list is that he has 2 main deck Blood Moons, which is going to come totally in handy here. So I think we've got 2 big things going on, right? Bradley, 2 main deck Blood Moons, came a little bit more prepared for the 4-color Omnath decks, for these slower decks. Matt playing these 4 copies of Karn as well as the 3 One Rings, a little bit tuning his deck a little bit more to be prepared for these other Omnath decks, you know, the slower decks of the format, decks that are relying a lot on the One Ring. So I would say that just off the bat, Bradley is going to have a bit of an advantage. But the thing about these 4-color Omnath decks is that they are so resilient and that your cards are so individually powerful as well that you can't really count them out. You know, Omnath super potent in a matchup like this. If Matt is able to play an early Delighted Halfling that isn't answered, have his removal spells line up well with Bradley's threats, and then follow it up with an Omnath to gain some life and really, get out of the woods, have an opportunity to start resolving these solitudes, I think he can make it win.
Well, that's your preview, folks. We have the finals coming up in just a minute, but we're going to cut to a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere.